Hopping over to another point in rock and roll news, Geddy Lee speaking on, of course, the late Rush drummer and former bandmate of his, Neil Peart, and he speaks on how they had sort of a strained relationship when it came to the final Rush concert, contrary to what people seem to believe, because from where I've been sitting, I always thought that Rush was just like this. They were tight-knit. I never really thought they had any sort of issues like that behind the scenes. But it appears that they were having some problems at the end of the R40 tour. So we have this quote here from Geddy Lee, who's been doing interviews to promote, I believe, his new show. He says, by the time that tour got toward the end, our relationship was strained, speaking on his relationship with Peart. He says, quote, with every successive gig, he was closer to the end. Neil was getting happier, and Alex Lifeson and I were getting less happy. So I guess that's really where it stemmed from. Sounds like Neil Peart was excited to end the band, and these guys were sort of sad, and they didn't want it to end. As Lee described it, as reported here by Loudwire, the band's final concert held on August 1st, 2015 in Los Angeles was uncomfortable. Geddy says, quote, the last gig was odd. We played our guts out. We played our hearts out in LA at that show. I asked Peart, I said, well, would you come out and take a bow? Maybe it'll be our last gig. He said, no, I don't do that. No, I don't cross that invisible line. We said, okay, but he did anyway because he couldn't resist it. He snuck out. He gave us a hug and we took a bow together. Lee continues, after that show, it was really weird because we didn't talk about it. He went to sort of his dressing room, which was ebullient and celebratory. And we went to see all of our chums and pretended we were ebullient and celebratory. I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong. But we went home in a very sad frame of mind. Lee finishes, quote, I had resentment, I'll be honest. I was resentful because I loved that tour and I wanted to bring it around the world. And Neil only agreed to so many gigs and he wouldn't bend. I thought to myself, what kind of a friend am I that would begrudge him after all he'd been through? And so it was healing to have that conversation. That's what he said after he spoke to Neil about this finally and found out that Neil was very happy with his new life. So interesting to hear. I can imagine that when you're ending something as a collective, when you're nearing the end of, it would be like a company or like any sort of job or gig that you would have. Everybody sort of, I could imagine, would have a different vibe and a different feeling. And if those feelings don't really mesh, I could definitely see it creating some sort of turbulence within the group. Even looking at the last Kiss show, since I hate to always bring it back to Kiss, but we were just talking about them. They all seemed to have a really different reaction to the last concert. Gene was the one who seemed the most emotional. He actually was up there crying by the end of the show. Tommy Thayer was also seeming to be emotional. But I noticed that Paul, at least watching the pay-per-view, seemed to be almost jubilant. He seemed really, really happy to be ending the band, which I thought was interesting. And I think it really just highlighted the contrast between what the guys were feeling in different moments at that time. So I could totally see that being an issue. And I could totally understand where Geddy and Neil are coming from. But it's good that they at least had to have that conversation and patch it up by the end of it. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments about the Rush situation. But most importantly, rest in peace to Neil Peart.